Hello and welcome back to the channel. As always, I'm your host, Morgan. Today I want to take a look at one of the guys with the lovely little check mark on Twitter who is a pro-fossil fuel activist. Personally, this guy was not on my radar at all until the winter storm in Texas happened, and the article that we looked at on this channel used him as one of their sources. I'll link that video in the description below for you if you want to look at that after you look at this one. The person we're talking about is Alex Epstein. Before we dive into the few tweets of his that I've picked out and chosen to look at today, we need to answer the question, who is this guy? Well, Alex Epstein is the founder of Center for Industrial Progress. And this is a, quote, for-profit think tank seeking to bring about the new industrial revolution. That's how they describe themselves on their website, by the way. Basically, once you dive through the website, look at the things they support, the things they don't support, their position is they are anti-green anything. Green equal bad. And they define like green actions and sustainable action and all that as anti-human. So if you're for sustainability, if you're for a greener future, you are anti-human and anti-progress. It's pretty black and white on their website. And basically, they just push for fossil fuels. And the website itself, so the think tank website, which is linked down below if you want to go look at it, is just riddled with a bunch of advertising for Alex Epstein's book and his podcast. And you know what? Let's talk about the book for a second. So Alex Epstein is the author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And I haven't read this book myself because I haven't come across a secondhand copy, and I personally don't want to buy a new copy because I don't want to give money to a dude whose pockets are already leaking oil. But this book is basically about why fossil fuels are good and why green energy is bad. And again, if I do come across a secondhand copy, I will read the book and probably respond to it here. And it would become a series here because I would likely need to break it down bit by bit and be angry together. But I digress. So what he's good at, especially what I've seen on his Twitter, is that he's a pro at straw manning those of us who are for green initiatives, who do push for a sustainable future. And he's really good at misrepresenting anything that has to do with that particular area. So he completely misrepresents green and sustainable movements. He really hates Elon Musk. The week that I was going through and making the outline for this video and picking the tweets, all of his first tweets were a thread basically just trying to get Elon Musk to give him attention and debate him on his podcast. But he also hates anyone that advocates for sustainability and a green future. And he frequently tags people and organizations like NASA and then gets mad a few days later when they don't respond to his tweets. So basically, Alex Epstein is this guy who is clearly at least respected by some right-wing sources that are for fossil fuels and very anti-green anything, anti-sustainable, anti-the future, basically. But I don't think he has too much of a foothold in the mainstream. As I said, he was pretty much, his name meant nothing to me until I read that one article from a very right-leaning source about the blackout in Texas and trying to lie and say it was caused by windmills, which it wasn't. But the reason why I do think it's necessary to look at the things that he's tweeting is because he does have that lovely little check mark, and he is a CEO and a founder of a think tank that does affect what happens with these energy initiatives and things like that. I haven't chosen some of his bigger threads to respond to just because they would take a very long time, but these are just a few snippets of some tweets from the last few weeks or month or so. Except the first tweet is a year old, and that's because it's his pinned tweet. And in general, if it's your pinned tweet, that's what you want people to see. So it's worth looking at. So this first tweet, as I mentioned, is his pinned tweet, and it's from July 20th, 2020. And it reads, "Climate change is real. Climate crisis is a delusion caused by 1, a religious belief that nature gave us a perfect CO2 level, and 2, a primitive ignorance of modern humans' ability to master an incredible variety of climates." And okay, you're pretty much coming out swinging, but you did put both climate change and climate crisis in quotes, so I feel like you don't necessarily believe that climate change is real like you stated in that tweet. But first, nobody, and I mean nobody, is claiming that nature gave us a perfect CO2 level. That is a massive misrepresentation of what people are saying about the data. What the data is saying is that all of this massive production of CO2 because of human activity is CO2 that the ecosystem cannot handle at the level that it's being produced. Nobody's saying there's a perfect CO2 level. That would be absurd, and that is just a flat-out misrepresentation. And for your second point, nobody is ignorant of modern humans' ability to master a variety of climates. Obviously, we've mastered a variety of climates. People live in every freaking part of the globe. But the point here is not saying that we can't master whatever happens. We're just suggesting that we master the changing climate sustainably. And the way to do that is reduce our negative impacts on the environment. Why is that such a big deal? Why are you saying that that's not mastery and ingenuitive and just smart of the human species? Why would us advocating for sustainability and noting quite correctly that we are in a state of climate crisis as far as the changing climate goes is a big deal? Why is that underestimating the ingenuity of people? This whole tweet is a bunch of misrepresentation. And basically our option here is to limit this rapid climate change to give the planet a chance. And that is objectively good. Why are you trying to say it's objectively bad? Why are you saying that because we want to do that, we're not being fair to modern humans? But whatever. Let's move on. Tweet number 2. This is from May 12th. "Fossil fuels are the dominant energy ingredient in Teslas and solar panels. Mining materials, processing materials, manufacturing, transportation, plus solar only exists at scale by parasitizing on fossil fuels." I assume that your typo here was supposed to be parasitizing, not parasiting. That's not a word. "So, Elon, no more Teslas and panels until more sustainable energy." Okay, this was part of his constant tagging of Elon Musk in a more massive thread on Twitter. But this was one tweet from that thread that I specifically wanted to respond to. And my response basically is, so what's the point? Yeah, you are correct in saying that fossil fuels are still the dominant source of energy and that they are used to produce Teslas and solar panels, but I don't see why that's relevant. Unfortunately, it is a necessity that we rely on technology during periods of transition. So the dominant technology right now is fossil fuels. That unfortunately has to be what we rely on as we transition into the greener fuel sources. That's just how science works. When they were developing the light bulb and developing networks to provide electricity to buildings, was it hypocritical of scientists to still be using oil lamps? Shouldn't they have just been using electricity and light bulbs to produce light? After all, they're just parasitizing on oil lamps at that point. Do you see how ridiculous that argument is? It's the same thing happening here. Our dominant fuel source to provide the energy we need for things right now is still fossil fuels, but we are in a period of transition to these greener energies. So your point is ridiculous. And no, solar is not existing by parasitizing on fossil fuels. We are in a period of transition away from fossil fuels towards green energy. During periods of transition, the obsolete is still going to be dominant for a time. And just because it's dominant now doesn't mean it will be even 10 years from now. Transition from obsolete technology to new technology is not a bad thing, nor does it make the new technology a parasite. Now, moving back in time a little further to January 22nd. My simple test for whether someone is sincerely concerned about O2 levels: do they avidly support the decriminalization of nuclear power? Far too few pass this test. At Bill Gates, at Stuart Brand, at Schellenberger MD. Far too many fail it. At Al Gore, at Elon Musk, at AOC, at Leo DiCaprio, etc. This is just another example of his obsessive tagging of people. And this tweet I do want to break down, because saying that you support shifting to green energy while also saying you don't support nuclear does not make you a hypocrite. And let's talk about why. I have already done a video on nuclear energy that I will link down in the description below or the pinned comment, whichever happens. But let's just talk about this. First of all, nuclear power isn't illegal. Why would you use the word decriminalization? It's not criminal to use nuclear power. So that is either a poor choice of words or clearly you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Now, it is true that some states are decommissioning nuclear power plants and moving away from nuclear energy, but, and this is a big but that entirely makes your point irrelevant. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, so, you know, the administration that actually watches over energy in the country, a new nuclear reactor came online in Tennessee in 2016, and 2 reactors in Georgia are expected to be online between 2021, so this year, and 2022, next year. So that hardly seems like nuclear power is legally prohibited or needs to be decriminalized. So were you just hoping nobody would fact check that tweet? Or, again, do you actually know what you're talking about? The other point that I would like to make about this tweet, however, is also made in my video about nuclear energy, about why it's not technically a fossil fuel, but you can't necessarily call it green either. So Alex Epstein claims that it's hypocritical of green energy advocates to be against nuclear because it's a net neutral for CO2 emissions. However, that entirely ignores the fact that there are safety risks associated with nuclear. And if you want the specific safety risks, please go check out my video. Basically, and I understand if the statement I just made is a little bit strawman-y, but if you do go through the thread with that tweet, he does go on a bit of a rant about it being net zero for CO2. But nuclear power plants have an inherent risk. They are risky to a specific radius around the power plant if they were to have a meltdown, see the Chernobyl disaster. And the mining for the fuel source, the uranium, is very impactful to the environment, and it's a finite fuel source as well. So they're not green, but they're not a fossil fuel either. Sure, it's net zero CO2, but it's still risky, so no, it's not hypocritical to be for green energy against fossil fuels, but also not support nuclear as well. You are making an argument that doesn't make sense. And I would like to point out that the think tank that Epstein created claims to be concerned about what's best for humans. And the point I would like to get across, the question I would like to ask is, if that think tank and supposedly Alex Epstein as well wants what's best for humans, isn't it a little hypocritical to be in favor of something that necessarily threatens the well-being of anyone that lives within a certain radius of any new nuclear plants? Maybe. Moving on. So now we're back at April 29th, 2021. Americans must make clear in no uncertain terms to Congress and this administration that we demand radical, pro-responsible development reform. They must take responsibility for the anti-development public lands crisis, not double down on it with the disastrous 30 by 30 plan. So, responsible development, first of all, is the development of an energy grid that relies on clean energy and moving away from fossil fuels. That's just the harsh truth for you. Responsible development means building a sustainable future. Because, again, protecting the planet inherently is going to protect human beings as well. The anti-development on public lands crisis that I assume you're referring to, since I couldn't figure it out by digging through that thread more, is the actions that have been taken by the Biden administration to ban new drilling on public lands for oil and natural gas. However, the important caveat to this is that it's only valid on the federally owned lands. And this decision is very unlikely to have an impact on the fossil fuel industry. Why? Because most of the drilling occurs on either state-owned or privately owned land anyway. Like, it is absolutely likely that this is going to eventually trickle down and prompt the states to push through similar measures as well. But in the near future, your precious fossil fuel industry is protected and just fine, boo-boo. Don't you worry. And you know what? To my knowledge, this federally owned land makes up the minority of where drilling occurs anyway. And it only affects new drilling projects. It's not shutting down ones that are currently running anyway, so hardly seems like a crisis. So this is our final tweet that we're going to look at today from this particular individual. And this one is from May 11th. Why aren't we building more freeways and other highways? Because of green anti-development policies and activists who think it's morally wrong to build new roads. So this tweet is also part of a longer thread. Notice how all of his tweets are parts of longer threads. He goes on a lot of Twitter rants that, if our former president were still on Twitter, would possibly give him a run for his money. But back to the tweet. You know what? Since I'm evidently part of that green anti-development activist side, nobody that I know of is saying it's, quote, morally wrong to build new roads. I really don't see where you're even getting that information. And trust me, I spent a long time digging, trying to figure out where that was coming from. And basically, this is just another massive, gross misrepresentation of those of us who are advocating for a green future. So what exactly are people advocating for? Well, what we're suggesting, instead of building a bunch of new roadways, is how about we make reparations to our existing roadways that are currently falling apart and desperately need some TLC. Now, around my own home in Southern California, the I-15 has been getting a lot of work done, and it is so much nicer when that construction is finished. That's just one example of an interstate that does need to be repaired and needs a little bit of help. And you know what? Another thing that's being advocated for as, something instead of building brand new roadways when we have roads that need to be repaired anyway, is to construct high-speed railways and improve public transit, because other world leaders have functioning public transit, functioning railways to help people get from point A to point B without clogging up the roadways. Now, if you dig through this massive thread, Alex Epstein does say that it's a waste of money to build these railways and the public transit because trains are slow and people can just fly. But flying is expensive, so check your fucking privilege. And it's very bad for the environment. But based on your whole Twitter persona and your website for your think tank, I don't think you care if it's bad for the environment. And I think that you probably think that the CO2 emissions are good for the environment. But I do apologize if I'm putting words into his mouth. So a couple of other bullet points from the rest of this thread that this tweet is from is he just carried on in a similar faction, and he does make the claim about public transit being a waste of money and the trains being slow and inefficient and blah, blah, blah. But he also does this weird thing where he compares the miles of roadways in China to the miles of roadways in the United States. And frankly, that's not a relevant point to make. And I don't really understand why he's so hung up on building new roads and claiming that our current roads are fine and don't need reparations. We just need new roads to solve any clogging problems on the roadways. But it seems like he goes on these incoherent Twitter rants a lot. And as of right now, if you've made it to this point in the video, you're probably thinking, why have I taken the time to pick some fairly random seeming tweets of his to respond to? Well, even though his tweets don't get a whole lot of attention for the most part, he does have a verified check mark on Twitter, and he is cited in some of the more far-right publications. So I do think that it's worth looking at what the other side of the argument is saying. And even though he's not getting a lot of attention, he is one of the few people that are putting voices to these particular ideas, at least publicly. So I do think it is useful to address them, especially if you are trying to advocate for a sustainable future. Having the knowledge what you're up against is important. And he is the head of a think tank that is very pro-fossil fuel. So that's as anti-sustainable as you can get for the most part. Which is why I wanted to make this video today and address some of his tweets. I do periodically look at his Twitter, but none of his threads themselves, they get kind of random and don't really stick together very well. So one thread goes off on multiple topics more often than not. So it's not worth it to respond to a whole thread. But like I said, I do have my eye out for a secondhand copy of his book, because I would be interested to read and respond to that. But as of right now, not happening, because that hasn't happened. If you have any thoughts about any of this that we've just talked to, if you think this was useful going through what someone from that side of the argument is saying publicly, let me know in the comment section down below. If you like this analysis, consider liking my video. If you think I was entirely unfair to this dude, let me know that in the comments as well. Also, consider subscribing if you feel so inclined. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, afternoon, evening, what have you, and I will see you all in the next one. Thank you again for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell if you would like to see more. And if you'd like to follow me on any of my other social medias, the links are down in the description below. Don't forget to check out thereptilegoth.com for all of my articles and blog posts. If you found any value in this video and you would like to help support the channel, please check out my Patreon page. That link is also in the description down below. And a special thanks goes out to my Diamond Dragon patron, Diane V. What you're doing is really helping me fund a dream here. I will see you guys all in the next one.